I'm Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Bill Raush of Alexandria, Virginia. It's November 10, 2014, and we're doing this interview in the United States Senate. Bill, thanks for agreeing to do this project for the Library of Congress.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you very much for having us.
Well, I'm going to learn a lot, I know, as we have this conversation. So let's just start from the top. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what your parents did, and because I'm kind of going to explore why you decided to join the United States military.
Okay. Well, my name is Bill Raush, as you mentioned. I'm the youngest of four. I had three older siblings, all sisters. I grew up in Marengo, Ohio, which is a small town, population about 240, north of Columbus, Ohio, with a capital for about a 45-minute drive. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, a homemaker, and my father was a factory worker. Retired 35 years in Anheuser-Busch as a factory worker a few years back. So
I see.
Yeah.
And do your parents, are they still alive?
They are. My parents are still alive. They're still living in Ohio. My wife and I will go back and visit them this Thanksgiving. I have an 11-month-old son, Theodore, so it'll be his inaugural trip to Ohio.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. And how about your sisters? Do they still live in Ohio too?
They do. My oldest sister passed away, but both of the other remaining sisters are married and have children, so they're all still right there when, stone's throw of Marengo, Ohio.
Yeah, and so when you say Marengo, a town of 240, you mean 240,000, 240.
240 people in the city limits. We lived outside the city limits.
You were in the suburbs.
Right, we were in the suburbs, which
Yeah.
was a mile from Marengo. So 4 or 5 odd acres, which I think is a smaller lot where we grew up. Lots of farmland.
Right.
And so it's an interesting county.
How about military service in your family? Your dad or other members of your family, had they served in the military?
Neither of my parents served in the military or my sisters. However, my grandfather, Cap Raush, served in the 82nd Airborne during World War II. So actually, this is the 70th anniversary of Market Garden, Operation Market Garden, which happened a couple months ago, and then the upcoming Battle of the Bulge. So he was Private First Class Raush in the 82nd Airborne, and then my other grandfather on my mother's side of the family was a sailor in the Pacific during World War II. Both joined at an early age. Grandpa Raush joined at 18 as soon as he turned 18, and my other grandfather, Herman Sailor, he actually lied about his age when he was 16.
Is that right?
And so he could join the Navy. So.
And your grandparents also from Ohio, so this is where your whole family's from?
Yeah, well, my mother's side, they have a contingent in Kentucky, but they saw the light and moved north to Ohio.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, so then how did you start to get interested in serving in the military?
Well, I was in high school and active with sport and academics and extracurricular activities. And my grandfather was really active in the American Legion Post 710, which he was a charter member of in Marengo. And they had a program called Boy State, which I know we have here in Virginia, and it's a great program. And so I was fortunate enough to be really involved with the Legion and then nominated to go to Buckeye Boy State, as we call it in Ohio, and just really had a phenomenal experience. And there was a strong sense of service and community where I grew up, and my family, the values that my family really embodied were about service and about purpose and being part of something bigger than yourself. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do after high school, my guidance counselor, Jerry Simpson, who's just a phenomenally great guy, said, "Hey, have you thought about the military?" And I said, "Well, no, I hadn't." And
so this is your senior year in high school?
Well, no, it's my junior year.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
And junior year in high school, and he handed me a postcard for West Point, and he said, "Hey, you should send this postcard in." The postcard was probably like 30 years old.
Yeah.
It was a really old postcard.
He'd had it for waiting for the right student.
He was been waiting for the right
yeah.
student. And so I filled it out and I submitted it, and then received all this additional information, and then started to talk to academy graduates, and there were one or two from our county. There was one that had gone to our high school, and I chatted with her about what it was like to go to West Point. There was another gentleman who my mother had gone to high school with, and he had gone to West Point. And so I started to talk to people about the service academies. And so that process began sort of my junior year of high school. I explored ROTC options to have some fallback options, knowing the academy process was difficult.
No, it's very
and
selective.
sort of went through that process and knew that I wanted to serve, I wanted to lead, I wanted to be part of a team, and then finally went and visited West Point, and was just in shock and awe. I joke there. I was sponsored by a gentleman by the name of David Utlaut, who's still active duty, and he ended up being the first captain of his class. And I joke that The only bad thing David Outlaw's ever done is actually show me around West Point because he made it look so easy.
Oh, really? He was too good a salesman.
Oh yeah, he was the top.
Yeah.
He was the top cadet, and I thought, this is a breeze. I can do this. But I loved it, and the history there on the Hudson. And
it's in the most beautiful setting.
it is. It's a beautiful place to be from, not a beautiful place to be at.
Yeah.
I say now, but I was just an awestruck, and so I made the decision to make West Point my first choice, and then Air Force and the Naval Academy my second and third, and went through that process to receive my congressional nomination. Senator John Glenn,
Sure.
Veteran astronaut, gave me my nomination to West Point, which was
Now,
really exciting.
what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1998.
Okay, so that was the year you were doing this.
So
application
97,
process.
98, it's about a 2-year process. And so the congressional started late in 97. As basketball season was getting underway.
Now, I got to interrupt just for a second. Since you've mentioned that it started a little bit with the American Legion at Boys State. Today, November 10, is the 95th anniversary of the American Legion's first big national convention.
There you go.
I found that out by reading the newspaper this morning. So read the paper, this day in history.
Yeah.
But it's good to give a shout out to the Legion because that Boys State, which we have in Virginia, has put a lot of good people on a path to public service. Okay, now back to the West Point process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up because we're going to talk probably about the Legion and some other vets groups as the conversation just naturally takes place. And so, anyways, long story short, I had a basketball game. It was in Ohio. We had a very state championship basketball team that I was a senior member of, and had a great season. And I'd gotten a call, and I said the call was, "Hey, you got into West Point, so you not only have your nomination, but you have your admissions." And I was excited. And then somebody, I think my mother probably called over to the school and told them, and they made an announcement during the basketball game that I'd gotten accepted into West Point. So I joked that. Well, at that point, I didn't have a choice. I had to go
once they
announced
on,
it into that small town. But yeah, so I started to sort of focus on getting ready to go to West Point. Graduated high school.
And West Point, West Point was your top choice over Navy and Air Force. You really wanted to go to West Point. In the Army.
Well, so I'm 17, right? When the process started, I'd had uncles who'd served in Vietnam and some cousins who were currently serving, but. West Point, for whatever reason, based off the history and the power of the visit, really was top of my list. And I was asked actually by one of the by my House of Representative panel why I ranked the 1, 2, and 3 West Point, Air Force, Navy. And I joked because 17, 18-year-olds don't know a whole lot.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I loved West Point. I explained what I explained to you. And I said, and oh, by the way, I'm not a very good swimmer at the time, so I'll put Navy last. And my eyes aren't that great. I had glasses at the time, so I put Air Force second.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There you go.
And it worked out. It worked out well. So I graduated high school in 1998, May or June timeframe, and then June 20th, I believe, reported to West Point for Beast Barracks that summer.
Yep.
So, it was a good way to surround myself with the military and. Had a really remarkable experience.
Yeah, so especially for folks watching who may not understand sort of the academy experience, I mean, so you're there, you pick a course to study. What was your major at West Point?
My major was geospatial informational science.
Okay.
And you pick that, you select that at the beginning of your sophomore year.
I see.
So the academic process is, I think on average, you graduate with about 40 to 50 more credits than your standard Bachelor of Science bachelor's degree, based primarily off their heavily engineering curriculum.
Right, sure.
And so if you don't major in engineering like I didn't, you still have to minor in it.
You have to take a lot of engineering and then add to it. Yeah.
And so you pick early in the process because the course load is so intense that if you wait too long, it's
playing catch up or
a bigger strain,
right?
So you do that at the beginning of your sophomore year.
And then you, at West Point, you're engaged every summer too, right? You're taking courses or you're doing training exercises.
Right.
You did that during the summers?
Right. So you have a couple of weeks off in the summer, depending on what your summer assignment is. My summer assignments included air assault school. So I went to air assault school as a cadet, which is a couple of week program where you air assault out of. I did it at Camp Smith, New York. It's based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Yep.
The 101 Screaming Eagles actually train folks to go through that, but they also have a mobile training team, MTTs, that go across to a couple bases. And so I was fortunate enough where I got to stay close to West Point and go to that course. and you rappel out of UH-60s, and you learn how to actually do loads so you can air assault equipment, whether it's a Humvee
Right.
or an artillery piece, that sort of thing. That was one of my summer assignments, going back to help train sophomore cadets. So your first summer is Beast Barracks, you're a plebe. Your following summer is cadet field training, or Buckner they call it. It's at Camp Buckner, where you get into a little bit more of the combat arms training as far as, heavily infantry tactics, but you start to learn about the other branches, armor, artillery, others. And then the third and fourth summer, that's when you actually get to do some of these other things. And so that's sort of included, what my summer assignments were. So, you didn't get to leave much, but when you did, you went out with your friends and tried to go home as much as possible. And then,
so did you graduate at the June of '02?
Right. So 2002, I graduated. September 11th, 2001 obviously happened at the beginning of my senior year.
Yeah.
And so that markedly changed our perspective on the world, and obviously has, changed my life, all of our lives. So we were the 200th class, the bicentennial, which...
Is that right? So you were the 200th graduate class.
It was founded in 1802, West Point, and in 2002 we graduated. And then, we've been at war ever since.
For those who aren't familiar, you graduated and you take your officer commission at graduation.
Yeah, take your officer commission
so
at graduation.
Second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant, I branched field artillery. So I was a second lieutenant in the field artillery, stationed to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
And that's where you do the artillery training.
And that's also where you do the artillery training, yeah. And so you get some time off, and then you go right into your officer basic course. And so I went to Fort Sill, went to the field artillery officer basic course, graduated that.
And again, for folks who don't follow this real well, so some, I guess, in the Marines, I have a son who's a Marine. Every officer goes through the basic school together at Quantico. In the Army, and I guess in the Navy, my nephew's in the Navy, you have a specialty, and you'll go through a basic school, but will be a specialty focus. So in your case, artillery.
Right. So that's a good point, actually, for the Marines. And so that said, all field artillerymen who are Marines go to Fort Sill for the training. So the Army, we have our commissioning sources, whether it's OCS or OTC, and then they go straight to that specialty course, or at least that's what they did back in 2002. So so that may have changed, but that's a good point.
And so so after your training at artillery training at Fort Sill, what was next?
I was assigned to be the executive officer for Charlie Battery 119 Field Artillery, which was a basic training unit at Fort Sill. And so I was a second lieutenant assigned there, and did that for 12 months. And that was during that time period was the war had kicked off. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan was already ongoing, and that was when we lost our first classmate of 2002, and then I had a drill sergeant who volunteered to do an individual augmentee mission, and he was attacked. He was involved in a mortar attack on a chow hall, and he came back severely wounded. And
this was a drill sergeant that you knew at Fort Sill.
Yeah,
he was part of your artillery team.
And so he volunteered to go downrange, and then. So those were the first two sort of,
felt it real close.
That we felt pretty close, and so visiting him as a young second lieutenant, and seeing him not be able to walk and struggle with his family, that was Drill Sergeant Westbrook. He was really phenomenal guy. That was sort of the beginning of the realization that we were at war. And so I did that for 12 months. And
at that point, you were an officer, and you're training enlisteds in the artillery MOS, basically.
Well, the drill sergeants did all the training. So let's just to clarify. So as an executive officer of a basic training unit, you're more responsible with just overseeing that training, planning, and the drill sergeants do all the executing. And the drill sergeant corps in the Army, the Marine Corps across the board, probably the most professional non-commissioned officers I've ever worked with. So really phenomenal folks. And we do short tours, officers with the basic training units, but those drill sergeants do long tours, and there's additional pay associated with that for good reason. It's intense, 12, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And really putting out a really professional soldier at the end of that.
So when you finished at your time at Sill in the training, what was next?
I stayed at Fort Sill, and they sent me across the tracks, as they said, to be a platoon leader, a fires platoon leader, which is what I wanted to be. That's why I picked the artillery for a multi-launch rocket system unit. So I was in Alpha Battery, Gators, 218 FA, and we fired rockets, and we fired a lot of them. So it was fun. That was my first platoon leader experience. That's why I went to West Point. That's why I became an officer.
How many folks in your platoon?
30 some odd folks.
Yep.
So I had a platoon sergeant, Sergeant Hart, who was, again, probably one of the most professional non-commissioned officers I'd ever worked with. He really took care of me as a young lieutenant who was still learning the ropes, and looked out for me.
And that's an important thing too for folks who aren't in the world. How the officers really learn to lean on their senior NCOs, and if you're smart, you really listen, and then you learn a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, I think it's probably a theme in every conversation you have, but two things always exist: the mission and people, or a purpose and the team. And so, we had a clearly defined purpose. We knew what the mission of the field artillery was. We knew what our mission was as MLRS platoon, and we trained to that, right? So we practiced shooting, we practiced reloading, hiding, firing, all of those things, and then the people component, making sure folks were still were physically fit, making sure that they were in good situations at home and had the training they needed. And so those two elements throughout my life, and I think everyone who's served, are critical components of well-being. And so we did that, and we field tested a new system, HIMARS, and we fired hundreds and hundreds of rockets there at SIL. And just had a blast. And the unit itself had just come back from the invasion, and so I hadn't yet deployed, but a lot of the soldiers had.
Yeah.
And so we were dealing with some really challenging situations with some of the young soldiers and the older soldiers as well, who had been part of the invasion and were struggling with some trauma. And again, it just stayed front of mind every day. I did that for a little over a year, and then I moved up to be a staff officer. And short of describing every step along the way for the unit, I basically stayed with that battalion until early 2006, when I was promoted to captain. On staff, I was a logistics officer, and then about that time, things had turned really badly in Baghdad, especially, but all of Iraq. The Battle of Anbar and Fallujah, excuse me, and Anbar had gotten quite bad, and so they started to put together these military transition teams, MTTs, and some police transition teams, 10-person teams that American personnel who would then be assigned to an Iraqi battalion. And so I was pulled off the battalion to go to one of these MTTs along with our battalion commander and some other officers. And then we sort of prepped to do that. We knew we were going to do MTTs, and then the last minute, that had sort of gone away. And then in the process,
that's a theme in these interviews too. Is
Yeah.
there may be a plan, but
mission
then it gets
changes.
Yeah.
And so we were all looking for jobs all of a sudden, which was a unique place to be in the military. And my battalion commander, John Sims, who lives in Alexandria as well, member of Post 24, found out about a mission with an organization, a task force called the Information Operations Task Force, the IO Task Force. And they were being led by a friend of his, and they were transitioning out, and they didn't have backfills. So John asked his then XO, Battalion XO, a major, one of his company commanders or battery commanders, and myself, if we would go with him to lead this task force, and I accepted.
And this is in Iraq or Afghanistan?
This is in Iraq. And so based primarily in Baghdad. So we didn't know a whole lot. A lot of the work was classified, still is, but sounds great. Let's go. Again, mission and purpose and people. We knew we were going to get into the fight, and we knew I knew the people I was going to go with had my back. So we went.
And when was that?
May of 2006.
So May of 06. Okay.
So it was right after the elections in Iraq, and then literally as we showed up in theater.
I was in Iraq in April of 06 as governor, visiting the Virginia Guardsmen and women in Baghdad. And then I went to Afghanistan too, but the only place I was in Iraq was in Baghdad, so about a month before you got there.
Okay. And I actually met some of the Virginia National
Oh, you did?
Guard. Yeah.
Yeah, because they were in the green zone generally. They were doing
badging, something like that.
They were doing some escorts of VIPs around the city, and that kind of work.
The Guard, I think you'll find the Guard and the Reserves especially, they did everything.
Yeah.
And
they were proud.
The entire spectrum of services provided. They were phenomenal. And so that was May of 06. And then we touched down in theater, and about a week into that, U.S. forces killed AMZ, who was the head of Al Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, and we got him up in Balad, and so that was a really special moment. The task force had taken him out, and we were really excited about that. And that was important because the Samara Mosque bombing, the initial one, had just happened. And so the sectarian violence was through the roof. And we were losing well over 100 U.S. service members a month. So that was a really big moment and a critical time to be there. And so, we were excited to do that. So that was in May of 2006.
And let me just get, so how long were you there in Iraq for this deployment?
I was there for 17 months. I did the Army was on 12-month deployments at the time, Marine Corps was on 6, and then there were some other deployments sort of in between. And then sort of during that time period in support of the surge, Marines bumped up from 6 to 7, Army bumped up from 12 to 15. However, I was coming towards the end of my 5-year active duty commitment through West Point and decided to extend. And I'd made the decision to leave the active duty, but I believed in the mission that we were supporting, and so I asked permission to stay on and help the follow-on team, and they accepted my request. So I ended up leaving in September of 2007.
So tell me a little bit about those 17 months.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time, and our task force was charged with a few missions. Initially, just defeating Al Qaeda in Iraq, as broadly as that might sound, but a pretty critical mission. And then subsequent missions of reducing the cycle of violence, which is what we call the sectarian violence piece, the Sunni on Shia and Shia on Sunni violence that we were stuck in the middle of, supporting the government of Iraq, GOI, still a critical mission that's going on over there. And then the more operational mission, we call the surge, but it was actually what we called Fard al-Qanun, which was, if I remember, it was a long time ago, Operation Enforce the Law, basically, where we were trying to really focus on the rule of law as we did throughout the conflict with the Iraqi people and the Iraqi government. And so, so our task force reported directly to General Casey and General Petraeus once he'd taken over. And so the deployment was long days.
And were you mostly in
I was mainly in Baghdad.
I
traveled some. We all traveled a little bit, but we were predominantly in Baghdad. Lived several places in Baghdad, and did everything from listening to Iraqis, talk about what the issues were with essential services, whether it was sewage, water, electric. SWETC was the acronym for that.
Municipal government stuff.
And so. And then basically just supporting Kaine doctrine, the counterinsurgency, the FM 324, where, hey, the essential services are really critical because as we're killing and capturing the bad guys, whether they're on the Sunni or the Shia side of the spectrum, and supporting the government of Iraq, we have to make sure that the folks, the people in Iraq, have a reason not to join these extremist groups. And so we did a lot of listening. We did a lot of liaisoning with other organizations, military groups that were supporting kill capture processes. The task force that General McChrystal was leading at the time was out of Balad, so they were very active. And then we would report to General Casey and then General Petraeus on the status of that. And we tracked that from every way from KIAs, how many folks we were losing, but we also did it in more nuanced ways as far as again, listening to Iraqis. There were probably 1 million public perception polls that we would tap into.
Right? Wow.
And IEDs planted, IEDs that had gone off. Somewhere along that process, once the Iranians became more involved and we started to focus on a counter-Iranian influence, CII, EFPs, which were foreign projectiles, which were much more deadly, became basically the preferred mechanism for killing American soldiers. And so we focused a lot on how many of those were occurring, how many we could roll up, and then we would report back and we'd say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we think is working, these are how many foreign fighters are coming through Syria, these are how many AQI or then ISI and MSC, again, organizations that we still hear about today. This is what they're up to. And then sort of through that process, we sort of an encouraging part of the story, I suppose, we came across a gentleman by the name of Sheikh Abu Risha, who's out in Anbar, and he'd approached the Marines and said, hey, I'm frustrated with Iraq, with the situation in Iraq. I'm frustrated with the government, absolutely, but I'm especially frustrated with Al Qaeda. And they've killed our sons, they've done horrible things to our families. We want to work with you. And initially the Marines said, hey, that sounds great, but we've heard this before.
Yeah.
You need to show us a little bit. And Sheikh Abu Risha really stepped up. And a lot of folks don't talk a whole lot about the tribal awakening, or the Anbar awakening, or the Sons of Iraq. It had a lot of names, but it really started in the deserts of Anbar with Sheikh Abu Risha saying, "Hey, I want to do something about this." And that's really critical, because when we're talking about the situation as it stands now in Iraq and Syria, across the globe, it's very nuanced, and people don't realize that.
Right.
But it took the individuals who are experiencing this on the ground to realize for themselves, and we helped them with that.
Yeah.
That, hey, I've had enough. Because ultimately, everything that we did as an organization and as a task force, we couldn't provide the lasting security necessary for the Iraqi people. They had to provide it for themselves. We couldn't provide those basic services. They had to provide it for themselves. So it was a tough, and we also couldn't capture everybody all day. They had to help us with that. And so
you had to see, and it is so relevant to the current situation, you have to see folks who are there, who are Iraqis, or in whatever part of the world, want to stand up to the extremism or violence in their own countries. And if they're willing to do that, then then we ought to help. And
absolutely.
But there's no substitute if they're not willing to do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, we can't do it all by ourselves, and that's not a knock on them. It's just one of those situations where they need to realize, and we helped them with this.
Yeah.
For example, they started to use AQ started to use women for suicide bombs and suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, SVBIDs, and telling the Iraqi people, hey, did you know that Al Qaeda, they're using women? Yeah. And they're using children, and those actions are not in accordance with Sharia law. Those are not the types of actions that represent your country. The foreign fighter piece was also really significant. AMZ was an Egyptian. He wasn't an Iraqi. So focusing on those types of narratives were important. We could talk about it all day. We won't. But
it is relevant to you.
It will always be relevant.
Of course.
And so ultimately,
your time there, you were working with Americans. Certainly, you did a lot of work with Iraqis.
Yeah, I worked with more multinationals, or as many multinationals.
Yeah.
I worked with Brits. We had we had Iraqis. We had some Lebanese. We had a lot of folks work with us who were just all phenomenally great people.
Yeah.
Back to that team piece. Everyone had everyone's back, and everyone definitely experienced some challenging, trying times, but we had an amazing team, and we had an important mission, because that was another piece at the time. We were losing so many people a month. There was a lot of people were tired in the military. Attrition rates were really high. The American public were high. Right. When you were elected governor in 2006, Congress flipped.
Yeah.
People said, hey, maybe we need to rethink this.
And you're already, at that point, you're already 3 years into the war in Iraq,
right.
and 4 years in Afghanistan.
Right. And so, but the purpose we had, and Scott Fitzgerald had a great quote about carrying two competing ideas in one's mind.
Yeah, that's right.
But
we define that as a sign of intelligence.
Something like that. I won't. I was going to leave out the specific details, but that was challenging for a lot of us because we weren't sure what we were doing there, but at the same time we knew we were doing good work, and which is why I volunteered to extend, and why a lot of us could be proud of what we were doing. And so that continued, and then we started to see. Obviously, General Petraeus had taken over. Sheikh Abu Risha had really pushed hard. Sons of Anbar had become an official program where we were paying folks, Sunni specifically, to help us. So literally, imagine folks that were shooting at you and trying to blow you up one week, and then the next week you're now working with them to fight Al Qaeda, which was good, but that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Sure.
And so sort of through this path, General Petraeus had taken over. We started to see progress. I had a new team chief, John Sims, my good friend, who had rotated back, was replaced by Vic Garcia, a West Point guy who was just a phenomenally great guy. Not an artilleryman. I was the only artilleryman left on the team. Yeah. But we continued the work, and we did a little bit of prep for General Petraeus before he came back for his September briefing, just a small piece of that brief. And then I got on a plane and I left. And that was the end of it for me in some ways, but in many other ways it was just the beginning. And so...
Let me ask you, during your 17 months there, were you under fire and danger often, or?
We had traveling was always a
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah.
There were two pieces: the IDF and small arms. When you were on a FOB, whether it was a large FOB like Camp Victory or the Green Zone. Obviously,
Yeah.
I didn't spend a ton of time in the Green Zone, but they were under constant indirect fire. And then some of the smaller pieces as well. Indirect fire and small arms was constant.
Yeah.
And when we were leaving, we were installing a system that was meant to respond to IDF, and it had something like a 40% success rate, but 40% is better than zero, right?
Yeah, right.
And so they were starting to queue that up when I was leaving. And then in traveling, from my perspective, traveling was always, again, twofold. One, small arms, but then the other piece, which was a little bit more disparaging, was the ID world was a world where you would get in a Humvee and you would and most of the Humvees at this point, we were transitioning from to 100% up-armored Humvees. General Ciccarelli had pushed that as the Corps commander before we'd arrived, and so we were very fortunate to have up-armored Humvees, and which was great. So you were concerned about the small arms fire with that, but actually much more so IEDs. And the worst thing about the IED piece is that you never knew when it was going to go off.
Yeah,
and so there was a feeling of helplessness where, you would get in a convoy to go from point A to point B, and you just hope everything worked out all right.
Yeah, even when it did, or it did 10 times in a row, there would be the anxiety about the next time, right?
Yeah,
so,
right. And everybody experienced that. But we all knew that, and we had that in common, I suppose. And so that's what it looked like from my lens. And
when you came back at the end of that 17 months, you had extended already. So was that the end of your active service?
so I planned this really brilliantly, aka horribly. My date of leaving active duty was December 20th, 2007, based off of terminal leave and everything. And so I thought, well, I'm on a 12-month deployment. There's no reason to mess around back stateside. So by then I'll have a roughly 3 months terminal leave, so I'll back up 3 months. And then, and then I'll give myself a couple of weeks to transition. So I got back September. I was stuck in Kuwait for a few days, which is another story. We don't need to waste time with on this. But I was stuck in Kuwait for a few days. And by the time I'd gotten back to Fort Sill, pretty much the entire unit had changed because it'd been 17 months.
Yeah, right.
And the Army was going through a reorg anyways, from field artillery battalions and brigades to fires brigades and the BCTs. And so I got back to Fort Sill, and they said, hey, take a couple of days off. My parents were there, which was really powerful.
Yeah.
In some ways, and in other ways, it was a bit of a challenge. So I took a couple of days off during the week, and then I'd met a girl, now my wife, Allison, who's a Brit. She was living in the UK, and I'd taken my mid-tour to the UK. And so I'd worked with some Brits, as I mentioned, and I didn't want to go back to Ohio. I didn't want to go back to Fort Sill. I was single, so what do? Hey, the Brits said, hey, you should come to the UK. I said, okay, why not? And so I'd taken my 2 weeks there, and I'd actually met her at a wedding at West Point. I had a civilian professor who'd studied Oxford while she was there. And so we had stayed in touch, and we met a couple of times in the U.S. at his wedding and some other parties. And so when I went to London, I thought, well, I'll go up to Oxford for a day, and I'll say hello to her and a couple of other of his former friends, or current friends, I suppose. And so I liked her quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so when I got back, I thought, hey, I'm just going to go see her. I'm getting out of the Army. Who cares? So after I had my couple days off, I bought a plane ticket, and I just flew to the UK.
Oklahoma to London, yeah.
And without permission, I'll admit it. And it was surreal. It was insane. It was, looking back, it crystallized the problem I was going to have for the next several years, and even to this day. And the challenges, I was at this amazing, beautiful English estate, and everyone was dressed, just magnificently, and it was a beautiful wedding and ceremony, and there were these amazing gardens, and I struggled to enjoy the evening regardless of how much champagne and sort
Yeah.
of fun activities, because it was just so surreal. I'd spent 17 months
Yeah.
in a really horrible place. And
now it was like 2 weeks later or something, and you're
yeah, and
Yeah.
it just was surreal. And so I did that for that was a long weekend, and I
Yeah.
came back to Fort Sill and didn't do a transition course. I didn't do anything. I
Yeah.
left. And I grabbed hold of whatever paperwork was absolutely required, and I got in my car, I packed it full of my stuff, and I drove back to Ohio. And I was done, and I was pleased to be done.
done with the military with your geospatial intelligence
Yeah,
degree, and
that I
and
didn't
your-
use a whole lot
Yeah.
when I was an artilleryman. And so yeah, I went back home, and I didn't have a plan, but I knew I wanted to have the war behind me. I knew that that I was out, and that whatever was going to happen next. And unfortunately, I didn't take time to make a plan for that.
Yeah.
And so
Do you think that's pretty? Do you think that's pretty common?
I'd say absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
do a lot
I
of
get
work
that
now with
feeling.
vets, and I met a gentleman over the weekend at a 5K, and 5K running out in Fairfax County. He's a retired Army, and he said, "Man, my son's a chief warrant officer, and he's out at I want to say Leavenworth. I think he said he was in Leavenworth. He's
Yeah.
just not concerned about his transition, Bill. How do we
Yeah.
help him?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well,
Yeah, right.
I'm sympathetic,
I can relate,
but let's
yeah.
have a conversation with him."
Yeah.
And so.
Probably a lot of reasons for that.
There are a lot of
Yeah.
reasons, and so for me, anyways, everybody's different. But I hadn't, and even to this day, obviously, I haven't dealt entirely with some of the trauma I
Yeah.
experienced, and so, I rather than face that, I decided to just put it behind me.
Yeah.
And
Which is that's a noble coping strategy, but sometimes it's
not a very
100%.
effective
Well, it's not 100% effective.
And
right?
so, but it
Yeah.
did a few things. One of the things that it did is it limited my ability to really get, be part of that team that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Because I didn't necessarily want to be around that many folks that were in the military.
Yeah.
I definitely struggled with having a purpose. But what I did do, and because I was from a small town and I went back to that small town, I tried to volunteer and do a few things. I went to both local county parties. It's not a very populated county, so
Yeah.
and there's not much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats at a local level.
Yeah.
It's about whether to pitch and seal a road or not,
Yeah.
which is usually a bipartisan effort. But I went to both county parties and said, "Hey, I'm here to help, whatever I can do." I went to the local school. They have a school levy system in Ohio. Is how they fund, fill funding gaps for schools, whether it's facilities, that sort of thing. I offered to help pass a school levy, so I helped do that. And then sort of in that process, a few things happened. One, I had a school teacher, Bill Grady, who's a Vietnam veteran. He was a combat medic, and I was good friends with his son. And he started taking me to Bob Evans once a week.
And this was a teacher that you remembered from back when you were
I
a
knew
student
him.
there. Yeah.
His son is still, we're
Yeah.
very close friends to this day. And he'd obviously, he knew something I didn't know,
Yeah,
which is that I
right.
needed to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we'd grab
Yeah.
a breakfast once a week, and
Yeah.
I'd say, hey, Bill Grady's a good guy. He's picking up my pancakes at Bob
Yeah.
Evans. And we actually didn't talk we didn't talk about my experience at all. I didn't ask him really too much about his, but we got to talking a little bit. He mentioned enrolling in the VA. He said, hey, listen, you need to do that. I said, I'm not so sure. And he explained to me that listen, you don't need it now.
Right.
You think you don't need it now.
Yeah.
But you're going to need it.
Right.
And he was getting his diabetes medicine
Right.
mailed to him.
And is there a VA in Columbia? In
There's
Columbus?
or east of Columbus.
Okay,
There's
not too far. From
yeah,
where
so
you
not far at all. And so I said, okay. So that was a very good thing that happened from it. The other piece is I went to my local Legion and the county VFW as well, and I joined them. And I said, hey, any way I can help? So they elected me first vice commander.
Yeah,
told me I
right
was in
away,
charge of
yeah.
membership, and I had to come help with bingo and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't realize that was really critical for what I needed. And I got involved with a political campaign doing veterans outreach work, which was really powerful. And
this is now like 07, 08.
yeah,
right?
this
So
is
we're
sort
kinda
of
into,
this is beginning of '08.
yeah.
I've been deployed for 17 months, so I didn't
Yeah.
need a job financially necessarily.
Right,
And
yeah.
my parents weren't charging me rent, which was fortunate. And so I was still figuring out what my purpose was. And so I got connected with this campaign, which is, by the way, the worst place to try and transition from combat. Do not do it on a political campaign.
Well, let's make sure we put this word out to everyone watching.
It's not a
this.
stable environment, and it's, they're good people, they're amazing people on both, on every side, but it just, again, hindsight. But it was great in the sense that I had a purpose.
Yeah, right.
And I was on a really remarkable team, and not just with the campaign, but with all the veterans I would meet. And man, it was fun. And I got to meet folks that needed help, and I knew that they weren't going to necessarily vote for my candidate, but I didn't care because they needed help. And so I'd tell them to call, they have a county system in Ohio. Hey, call this county VSO.
Right.
Don't tell them who you're going to vote. Don't even bring up politics. And just tell him, and he'll help you with your claim, or he'll help you with whatever you need to get help with. And I had a blast. And sort of through all this, I'm still dating this wonderful, amazing woman from the UK.
Get the long distance.
So I'm flying over there like every 4 or 5 weeks, putting an intern in charge. Nothing bad happened, fortunately, while I was away. And she'd come over to the States, and so we continued that relationship. And then after that presidential campaign was over, I was in Ohio, which is always a critical swing state. So after that primary and that general election work, it was over, and I thought, man, I need to take some time off. I proposed to my wife, Allison. I flew back to the UK, proposed. She said yes. So we started to plan for the wedding the following year, and then I said, and now I need to really get a job again.
Yeah.
Because that whole campaign thing was fun, but
you knew it wasn't going to be politics full time.
Well, I enjoyed it, but and I'd thought about leveraging that into a follow-on job.
Sure.
But at the same time, I just, I still hadn't figured out what my purpose was. We're all trying to figure that out.
Yeah, no, that never stops. That never stops.
So after that, I started to look for a job, and there was a supporter on the campaign who was a Medal of Honor recipient. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he was starting an IT firm. And he reached out and said, hey, if you're interested in moving to Washington, D.C., which I was. I wasn't looking to stay in Ohio. I'm from an amazing place, but I didn't feel like whatever it is I wanted to do, I wasn't finding it in that little small town. And oh, by the way, my amazing wife and I, what we wanted to do, we wanted to be a little bit closer to everything from the National Stadium to the Smithsonian.
Even an international airport with a nonstop flight to London wouldn't be
That's
bad.
helpful, right?
Yeah.
And so so I took that job and helped build this startup. I think it was like the 4th or 5th employee.
Wow.
And
that is it kind of in your academic degree now? We're kind of taking advantage of it.
No,
really?
it's
So
not.
your geospatial stuff didn't help in this?
Well, I suppose it helped a little. It didn't hurt. But with that, or even the civil engineering minor, it was. I think what it was, and I think he understood this. He understood the soft skills that service members have.
Yeah.
Whether they're a combat veteran or not.
And just say so run through some of those just again
so
for folks watching.
So we have soft skills, hard skills. Hard skills, right? What's your degree in? Do you have a PMP? Are you Lean Six Sigma? Are you a certified truck driver?
Yeah.
Are you those are hard skills. Soft skills, hey, here's a problem. Fix it.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, what's going on? Tell me look at this situation and what's going on. Look for opportunities to work together. Basically, getting the job done.
Yeah, and it's 5 o'clock, but I don't stop because the problem isn't fixed. I'm still going to work on it until it's done.
Right.
Or
Well, and by the way, I'm glad it's not actually 5 o'clock.
We haven't gone that long. Yeah,
So that's precisely it. So mission first, people always. And he clearly saw that and put me to work. And threw myself at it. We had fun. I learned a lot. I had a great mentor while I was there to learn a lot about business. The VA was one of our clients, so I got to feel like I was working for part of this purpose again. Veterans specifically. Again, sort of didn't plan it, but there was this veteran piece, and started to make my life here in the Virginia area, and still kind of avoiding a little bit as far as trying to reconnect or deal with some of the trauma, but I was doing all right. I had a job. I'd got my wife over here on a green card, which was really a big deal for us. We'd gotten married, which was huge, and so we're making our lives in Old Town Alexandria, which is an amazing place.
It's a great place. Yeah.
And so life is good. And then sort of through that process, Um, the company did very well. The company was bought out by a larger firm, PwC, and then I was looking for a little bit more stability. And so I went to a larger firm, and I stayed in the private sector for another 3 odd years doing DoD consulting work. And again, soft skills, but now I started to kind of tighten up on some of the hard skills as it related to being a consultant or a contractor. But I was still missing something, and I was using unhealthy coping mechanisms. I couldn't sleep, and so rather than really try to get to sleep, I'd stay up all night. Or I'd have 1 or 2 drinks, and I'd turn into 4 or 5. And so it was tough. And then sort of through that process, I realized at some point, hey, I needed to deal with some of this stuff, and started to do it. And started to put my support team back together, as just like I had in the military. Because the great thing about the military is, even West Point and all these places, you have to get up. You have to get up. You have to go to PT. You got to go to work. And so even if you're having the worst day in the world,
well, that's a good point, huh?
You've got battle buddies on either side of you, and they'll pull you through it. And
they push you, pull you, yell at you, love you, right?
Right, whatever's needed. And then when you transition out, if you don't have that, I came from an amazing family, a loving family, constantly asking me if I was okay, but over time, and we see this a lot with folks that good friends of mine and some family members and others who struggle with suicide and other issues. You need that support group.
Right.
And so
that we've had testimony at our hearings here about that very thing. It's not the reliving of the trauma that's hard. It's not having the close-knit network that all of a sudden disappears. Because it's as close as it gets if you're in any kind of a military or combat situation. It's the absence of that is the really hard thing.
Well, the thing is, even if you haven't served, right, we know, there's research out there, we already know that an engaged community is a healthy community, right? And that education is better, and that crime goes down, all these great things. And so I started to sort of seek that out, and
through VSO,
through a few things. One, I made my sort of initial list of people that I was close with, and that I could share some really intimate stuff with. And
who would get it because they've been through similar.
So family, absolutely. Boom, they're on the list. John Sims, my old battalion commander, who I went to Baghdad with. Again, remember Post 24? He's definitely on the list. Some old West Point buddies of mine, they're on the list. So I started to make some friends who I'd made on the campaign. All these really close people. I said, hey, I need them on my list. And I started to talk to them. I said, hey, here's some of my challenges. I went out and talked to a counselor. And then through that process, a good friend of mine, Mike Irwin, who was a classmate at West Point, started an organization called Team Red, White, and Blue. Team Red, White, and Blue is an organization, or a nonprofit, and their mission is to enrich the lives of veterans through connecting in the community via physical and social activities. And he'd started, they're about 4 years old now, but when he initially started it, he tried to get me involved, and I didn't want to get involved.
And is he based in the D.C. area?
He's based across the country now.
Okay.
So they have over 50,000 members. I lead the Alexandria community.
Wow.
That shows you how far I've come, obviously, since I first told him I wasn't going to have to join his group. But they were doing a lot of ultra marathons, a lot of triathlons, and I thought, man, I don't want to do that. That's not. I didn't want to do a whole lot of things, but I definitely didn't want to do that. And so finally, they'd hired a good friend of mine, Joe Quinn, who I was in Baghdad with, and he'd worked the tribal awakening stuff really hard. He was at my wedding, and he and I know each other's trauma pretty well. And he said, hey, man, you should. They hired me. I'm going to be one of their full-time employees now, and I'm up in New York. You should rethink this. And I said, you know what? Let me give it a go. And so I went to the first event, and it was a run on the National Mall. This is about 1.5 years ago. And I was a little awkward, and I wore like an old Army shirt or something. By the way, I was in the reserves. We skipped that. But I tried to find some of that fulfillment and purpose in the reserves, so I joined the reserves again, did that several years, and just recently transitioned from active reserves into the inactive reserves. But so I went to one of these runs, and it was a tough run. I hadn't been for a run in several years. I was pretty good at the track and cross country as a kid.
Back in the day.
Used to max my PT tests in the Army, but I struggled with the run. And it was good. And I thought, man, that was nice. And there was the scientific piece of getting moving. Which was helpful. But then, all the people there were really nice. And they all seemed pretty genuine. So I went back, and then I went back again, and then they were doing something else. And so I'd go to that, whether it was a rock climbing event. I'm like, man, I want to rock. I'm not, okay, I'll rock climb. And then I realized quickly the power of this. And what I'd realized was a few things. One, I realized it was a team. I realized the purpose was actually not going for a run. It was having a reason to get together. And then I looked at my
the run was the excuse.
The run was the excuse. And then I looked at my coin experience and then my campaign experience, the community piece of the campaign. And I said, well, wait a minute. Put my entrepreneur hat on from the private sector. And I said, wait a minute, this is one, it's not new. Nothing ever is hardly.
Right, yeah.
But two, this is powerful. And so I said, well, I'm going to just do something in Alexandria. I'm going to take all of these different models and I'm going to do it in Alexandria. Well, I knew there's American Legion Post in Alexandria. Everybody who lives in Old Town knows about it. It's an amazing facility. It's full of amazing people. You know this better than I do.
No, I've done 24 events. No, I don't know it better than you, but 24 is a very good place.
That should be our challenge at the end of this.
It's a very good place. It really is.
And they speak highly of you, and they know that your commitment for the Post, which is why I'm here. The Post reached out to get some folks to come speak with you.
Good.
And it's powerful. And so we started to do that, and we met every Tuesday, which just happened to coincide with when the city council meets. And so they got to see us. And we're like, hey, just come on out for a run, come out for a walk. And then about a month later, last Veterans Day, the mayor, Bill Ewell, I mentioned earlier, said, hey, it's the year of the
Bill's
veteran.
a good friend of mine.
And he's an amazing guy.
Yeah, it really is.
And he's beyond committed to Alexandria, where he grew up. And he said, it's the year of the veteran. And there was a new organization called the Alexandria Business Enterprise Center, who was being held up by a friend of mine, Emily McMahon, who was a year ahead of me at West Point. And she's super sharp and combat vet and lots of business experience. And I thought, oh, that's great. This is great. And John Sims, my old battalion commander, he had transitioned off active duty after 35 years. And sort of through that process, I thought, man, let's just get everybody together and let's collaborate and let's integrate everything we're doing and try to bring that team part that I was talking about, that that was missing in a lot of our lives, or missing in my life. Let's bring it to Alexandria, or let's re-engage it, because it's already there with a lot of folks.
Sure, yeah.
So let's leverage it.
Reconnect,
And so we started to do that. And Bill Armony, who is a lifelong Legion member, and John, who you're chatting with, if he's still around, he's still over there.
Yeah, John.
And
great interview.
I started to meet these amazing people at the Legion. No surprise, right? Because I'd done the Legion thing. Boys State, the whole bit. And so after a little while, we stopped going to a local restaurant, which the idea there was to connect with folks who hadn't served. But we'd gotten so big. We had anywhere from 20 to 50 people coming out for these runs.
Wow.
Like, let's go to the Legion. That's the best spot in town anyways. So we started to go to Taco Tuesday, right, John?
Taco Tuesday at Post 24.
Yeah, Post 24.
Okay. I'm going to come.
And you should. You should. So, and so that's when, frankly, that's when things started to fall in place for me. And I started to realize, hey, my purpose is just like it always was. It's to get the job done and to take care of people. And I do that by surrounding myself with amazing people.
And you've been using this phrase that it's the, a purpose in people, right?
Yeah, that, for me anyways.
Yeah.
And the great thing about it is it's a safe place, right? I mean, for all of us have challenges and obstacles, but this is a safe place. You come, whether it's through Team Red, White, and Blue, whether it's through that Legion, Post 24 again, full of remarkable people.
Yeah, and from different service eras.
Absolutely. And family members and civilians who are advocates. It's a place where everyone can go and we all have a common purpose.
Yeah.
And we're all walking in the same direction. Some of us want to take different routes. That's okay. We're all trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, that's for me when it started to click.
Exciting.
It was exciting. It's still exciting. And so anyway, along that path, I decided to leave my private sector job, and now I'm doing full-time work for vets, which is great, and I love it. I still volunteer probably 20 hours a week with RWB. And still go to the Legion, and we're still doing Year of the Vet activities. We've got like 30, 40 people who meet on a volunteer basis every month, and we're trying to integrate just nothing new. Nothing new. It's not about creating something new. It's just about taking what's already there.
And making sure that everybody is aware. So that
and then briefing the mayor, and briefing Bill Ewell. So tonight we're having a kickoff event for Veterans Week in Alexandria. And our, let's see, it's November, so our Congressman-elect's going to be there.
Don Byer.
Don Byer, who's a great guy. Bill Ewell's going to be there. So we've got the political piece, then we have some city folks that are there, we have business, we have all of the vets, the Post is going to be represented.
That's what a
and
great thing.
Yeah, and so now people, it's just awareness. So now we sync all that stuff together, and then frankly, I think what's next is, we're just going to tell folks how we did it in Alexandria, and we're not done, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Help other
and
communities
help other
do the same
communities
thing.
do the exact same thing. And it's good for vets.
Wow.
It's good for family members. It's good for everybody. So it's that again, that sort of that purpose and the people component. And
So when we started this discussion, the only piece of advice I got, well, I thought the only piece was it had to be longer than 30 minutes, but then I got a second piece. It had to be shorter than 60 minutes, and we're getting kind of near the end. But let me ask you this. So we've walked through this journey from the, we've walked through this journey of, here we go. Is that? Yeah. There we go. We've walked through this journey of the 17 or 18-year-old starting to think about West Point to the, how old are you now, can I ask?
34.
Okay, so now you're at the end of, the 17-year period. You're not active, and you have you transitioned out of the reserve status? Or are you
No,
still
I'm still in the
reserve?
inactive ready reserve.
Okay.
I mean, it's an area that I'm probably likely to get back in.
But how, if you were the 17 or 18-year-old now in 2014, would you make the same choice, go the same route?
I would. And had you asked me that question 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have given you a different answer. But I am who I am today as a result of my experiences, like all of us are.
Yeah.
And with a purpose and the right people around me, I've been able to, frankly, leverage those experiences, some better than others, to be in a position where, I'm a good husband, I'm a good father, and I'm a contributing member of my
Helping
local
people out.
Alexandria community, trying to help people out. So absolutely, I would do it again.
That's something. Well, I sometimes get asked to do weddings as an elected official, and it's
Great.
usually of former staffers. And I always say, as somebody, I'm about to celebrate my 30th anniversary 2 weeks from today. I always say, the secret is relationships and a sense of purpose and experiences. And if you can, wrap those up, that's just the secret. But that sense of purpose is important, and I think we're probably all fated to continue to look for that. I mean, I'm not sure that you're ever going to say, well, I've completely found it and I don't need to look anymore. But you've been on a great journey, and it sounds like the experiences you've had are now being put to use in a great way to help others, and that's by definition a great journey.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really
I
happy.
appreciate that.
I'm so happy that we had a chance to talk, Bill, and I look forward to seeing you at Taco Tuesday at Post 24.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Mhm.